You're listening to Cinema Rex, an Iranian film podcast. Episode 2, Masud Kimiai's The Deer. Should we start with a mattress ad?
Probably.
Do you want to do like a Better Help or HelloFresh ad? We're not being sponsored yet, but I mean, you might as well come up with something.
No, I think we should sponsor ourselves and be like, if there's anyone listening who wants to advertise their business, then let us know. Contact us, and we would love to do an ad read for you.
Perfect. Let's do that. Durud bar shoma, dostan aziz. This is Cinema Rex, an Iranian film podcast. I'm Kaveh Mohebi.
And I'm Farhan Moradi.
Welcome to our show. And how are you doing today, Farhan? How is your throat?
I'm getting over a cold, and I don't think I've ever had a cold like this before. It has lasted very long. It's been about a week and a half. I did like 20 COVID tests. It wasn't COVID. I ended up going to the doctor yesterday because I was like, this has lasted a long time. Anyway, we don't need to make this Farhan's health podcast, but just for the listeners, forgive the state of my voice.
I think it brings a certain charm and dreaminess to it. So to this podcast. So I'm glad your voice is in this state. Today we'll be talking about the 1974 Masud Kimiai classic, The Deer, also known as
Kavaznha.
Yeah. And it's a film that is now wrought with controversy and infamy for a myriad of reasons. But we'll get to all of that in due time. But to start with a little bit of a plot summary, with your permission, The Deer. Wounded by the police, a bank robber, Qudrat, returns to his childhood neighborhood in hopes of finding his old friend and schoolmate, Saeed, only to discover that Saeed has become a hapless drug addict hooked on heroin. Initially hoping to heal his wounds and stash his bag of money, Qudrat takes it upon himself to help Saeed rediscover the man he once was, hoping that his presence and their renewed friendship will help Saeed kick the habit. All while a restless and rowdy neighborhood disturbs the peace and the looming threat of an increasing police presence creeps up on the reunited duo in this tale of honor and lifelong friendship that endures in even the worst of times. It doesn't have a Rotten Tomatoes score as it does not have enough modern reviews. So Farhan, I'll ask you, what are your thoughts on The Deer?
I really enjoyed it. I think I had seen clips of it as a kid, but I don't really remember too much. This is by far the grittiest and most violent Iranian film I've ever seen.
Same.
And to be honest, it's not even that gritty or violent compared to most Hollywood films. But yeah, definitely out of Iranian films. But ironically, it's also probably the one with the most heart, which it kind of seems oxymoronic that it's the most gritty film, but also the one with the most heart. And I think that for that reason, this film has its place in the Iranian film pantheon.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that thing about heart because I hadn't really put my finger on it in quite that way, but there's so many notes I'd made when watching the film about the tenderness between the two friends. And even like the first time they reunited, the hug they gave, I don't know if it's just the actors giving a great performance, but it's like I'm 10 minutes into the film and I genuinely can get a sense of their friendship. It seemed like the two actors hadn't seen each other in 20 years and were hugging each other because it was so loving. Do you know what I mean? That first moment when he meets him, when he's like doing the emceeing or DJing of like the event, it was so heartwarming. And I'm like 10 minutes into the movie thinking like, wow, these two, like I genuinely believe in this friendship so quickly.
Yeah. It's funny too, because I didn't clock at first what his job was. Like when he was on the mic. And then I was like, oh, he's like announcing to people that the show is about to start. But like now with modern,
of course.
Yeah. And now with like modern shows, it's not even a person that does that. It's just like an automated chime or like an automated like voice that's just like the show is about to begin or whatever. So the fact that they're like paying this guy, what did he said like 7 or 8 tomans, which is not even
Yeah.
equivalent to a penny today,
Yeah.
is pretty funny.
Well, it's also like, because I love when we first meet Saeed, he's like announcing, I didn't even put it together either. He's, of course, announcing the next show, but he's like slumped over. He's got a cigarette in his hand and he's kind of like reading, and he's so like, he's already kind of high off heroin or whatever. And what he was reading was first lost on me. And then when I turned the subtitles on, I caught it. Did you notice? I don't know if it's supposed to be a joke or not, but it's like the line is, and like coming up next is the all singing, all dancing hit comedy Hitler's Anger, aka The Rude Servant. That's what he's announcing.
No, you know what's funny is I clocked what he was saying, but it didn't even like occur to me that he had like called it a hit comedy.
All singing, all dancing, and it's called The Hitler's Anger, which is like it's almost like a joke you would get out of like The Naked Gun or something. That's such a clever, funny joke for 1974 Iran.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you first meet him and I just want to say, we're going to gloss into like whatever, but like the performance, Saeed is like, I don't know. He's so captivating. And I got to give kudos to the film for like, even the makeup used on him, his teeth look awful.
Yeah.
His nails and fingers look terrible. He's so convincing as this like battered and destroyed drug addict. It's not like some, I don't know, not that I would expect an Iranian actor to like phone in this performance, but he's just so genuinely believable as this like destroyed and distraught man off the get-go that you feel so much empathy for him.
Yeah.
Which I loved.
Yeah. I can't echo what you're saying more. I will say that and this is obviously a product of its time. But the fact that the actor is like clearly in very good shape was something that I was like,
right.
Okay, I have to suspend a little bit of disbelief here because clearly this is a very like handsome and like well-built man, but I'm supposed to buy that he's like a heroin addict on the verge of death. That being said, the way that he is able to like, he hunches over, he moves more slowly and all this stuff, I think works really well to sell that extra missing piece. Do you know what I mean? Like this is obviously before people like Christian Bale were completely transforming their bodies for roles.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's a really good point. Like he seems, obviously he's in like good shape as an actor, but he does seem like he's carrying himself through this film like he can't even lift his head that much.
Yeah.
He's so like drowned out in the weight of his own misery.
Yeah.
And it is like a transformative performance in his body. I should also add, because I didn't mention in the plot summary, but Saeed is played by Behruz Vossouri,
yeah.
Vossouri, and Qudrat is played by Farmaz Qaribian. And they're essentially the two main anchors of the film, this friendship between the two guys. And I'd say probably the third role is Fatih, which is played by Nosrat Partovi, rather. But they're the three central linchpins of the story and the dramatic thread. And I think all three of the actors are giving such strong, convincing performances all around. So like kudos to Kimiai to be able to get, I don't know, just brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant casting and brilliant performance.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I also love all the little characters in like the complex that they live in.
Yeah.
Like they all have such distinct personalities. And you can tell that this is a very, very like lived in space. It feels very real and it feels alive and it feels organic. And like these people in this community have an established relationship with one another. It reminded me a little bit of Do the Right Thing in that way.
Yeah, totally.
Because in Do the Right Thing, same idea. You have this neighborhood in Brooklyn that feels very real and it feels alive. And like you have all these very distinct voices that have like a contextual relationship with each other. Like you can tell, okay, these people go back. Like they all know each other, right?
That and not the neighborhood, and as well like the workplace where Fatih works as an actress, that feels alive. Like there's the scene with the the next performance that you see while they're backstage is the guy who's doing like the sound effects on mic.
Yeah.
And it's like the Police Academy guy. He's sort of like doing like a
Oh,
whole
yeah,
scene through sound effects alone. Like that guy's got so much charisma and character, and he's just there for like maybe 15 seconds in the movie.
Yeah.
شما بلا فاصله تیر اندازی میکنین حالا بعد کنیم بعد حرکت کنیم
I also like the landlord who's constantly showing up in the neighborhood telling everyone to pay their fees. And when they don't, his like act of revenge is to bring like 20 sheep into the courtyard of the house.
Yeah.
And essentially force sheep upon them as like a form of punishment.
Yeah.
Because they haven't paid yet. Great. Also, when he stands up for his girlfriend at work, like you see Fatih getting upset that he's essentially, the other actors are giving her a hard time. So Saeed shows up, obviously strung out on junk, and he wants to stand up to these actors and push them around, but they're much stronger than him. So he like,
and they're sober.
They're much stronger and very sober. And he like kind of takes them aside and says, "Hey, like, let me just slap you around a bit to make me look good in front of Fatih, please." And then the actor like agrees to let him do that. Like you see him slap him around, and then when they walk away, you see the actor like chuckling and smiling, but he's sort of an asshole character, and yet he's doing that for him. It's like very sweet. Like there's a layered kind of complexity to even these side characters, which is really great.
Well, I think I will say I wouldn't be surprised if Saeed could actually kick that guy's butt, because we see later on in the film. Well, I don't know. There's an argument to be made that he could potentially beat him up, because he was like roughing him up, and he was like clearly winning that fight anyway. But I think that it got to a point where he was like, all right, I've kind of already given you what you deserve for this situation, but I'm going to level with you. I need to hit you a couple more times, and I need her to see it. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. What I don't, I mean, because you can't forget the fact that Qudrat tells him that when they were growing up, he was the strongest kid in school. He was the one that would chase all the other bullies away.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's in his history to be this like strong man. He's the one they all looked up to. And that's what's making his current situation so tragic, is that he has it in him to be a strong, commanding leader type figure. And he's been sort of reduced to the shell of his former self, which why, like you say, it's believable that he could beat up most anyone.
Yeah.
But he just can't get his shit together right
now.
And
I don't know if this was the case for you, but a lot of those interactions and like the stories that he tells about their childhood, or the way that Fatih is like, you're the man here, you're expected to stand up for me, blah, 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 blah. And then in the courtyard, all the women are like, there's not a single real man here who's like going to fight for us. Like these are stories that I've heard from my aunts and uncles and my parents and my grandparents from Iran, that like, this was kind of the way that things were, was that in general, people were like respected each other and there was kind of social decorum. But when people stepped out of line, generally there was like one or two people who would step up and be like, all right, you don't get to do this, this, and that. And that slowly over the years, people stopped stepping up to help each other. And I found that very fascinating, especially because like in this context too, Fatih and that one other neighbor in the courtyard, these are both women who, if you're looking at it through like a modern lens, you're going to be like, oh, these women don't have any agency. They're not standing up for themselves, yada, yada, yada. But in the context of like the 70s and the fact that this is Iran, the fact that both of these women are yelling back and they're like, what the hell is your problem? Like leave me alone, leave us alone, blah, 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 blah. And they're saying this, and that they're trying to call on other men to also come in and do their part, I think shows that these are in fact women who do have agency. There's just obviously a contextual difference there of time and place.
There's also, though, like I'd argue the woman who lives in the courtyard, who's like on the upper floor, actually is pretty commanding even for today's standards because she's yelling at the other woman. You know, there's a woman yelling up at the man.
Yeah.
There's like some pretty like the women that are really standing their ground and
Yeah.
giving everyone a piece of their mind in a pretty contemporary way for even, you know, like it's not even just, oh, she's standing her ground for 74, but like that one woman in the courtyard is like, I don't know, she's like not letting anyone push her around, which I thought
don't
was
know.
pretty badass.
I think within the context of Iran, that is still very contemporary, like today. In fact, I would say that that is progressive for today in Iran. But I would say that in a film, like in a movie set in the US made by American filmmakers or by Hollywood, critics watching that scene would likely be like, that woman doesn't have any agency. She's a damsel in distress, and her whole thing is that she's waiting for someone to save her. That's why I think that it's unfair for us to look at it in that lens, because given the context, that is actually pretty, what's the word I'm looking for here? Determined and persistent. And it shows strength in a character given that context. Like she doesn't need to get down there and physically fight that person or like toss aside all these men or whatever to defy the patriarchy. I think in that context, she's doing that already.
You're talking about the woman in the courtyard, not Fatih, right?
Both, to be honest.
Yeah.
The woman in the courtyard a little more, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think also a large portion of this is kind of like, it's really kind of showcasing people who have fallen to bad times and finding the strength either within themselves or through each other to kind of stand up for themselves. Again, a large portion of what Saeed's journey is, you know, standing up for his girlfriend, Fatih, and making her proud. Like, you know, once he starts kind of getting his shit together, you know, Kodrat gives him that big speech about stand up for yourself, become a strong person. And he does, and he sort of returns back to where Fatih works and stands up for her again, but this time not through like a handshake deal, whatever. Like, and Fatih's actually really impressed with that.
I think it's about taking action and being assertive. That's the word I was looking for earlier, is being assertive.
Oh, right. Okay.
And it's a common theme, like you said, like it's the women are all being assertive, but the reality is that in that context, it's not enough for just the women to be assertive. You also need the men to be assertive. You need that balance, because unfortunately, a lot of these men in this society are not going to back down necessarily if it's just a woman saying it. But when you have a woman and a man both calling out the same person, then that person's like, oh, shoot. Then they get embarrassed or they feel self-conscious or whatever, and they back away. Because when it's just the men doing it too, they see it as a call to fight. If it's just the women doing it, they're like, oh, you're just a crazy woman, blah, 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 blah. But when it's both doing it, all of a sudden these perpetrators are like, then they're on the defensive and they're like, well, I'm not that bad. Like, I have to pay my own bills too, guys. Come on, blah, 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 blah. And then eventually everyone like jumps on that guy, right?
Yeah, and also with that, there's the whole element of Saeed who has to keep returning to the drug dealer. And the first time he shows up, he's begging and pleading, and he's weak, and he'll do anything for more drugs. And he promises he'll have money next time, and he gets smacked around a bit, and the drug dealer's daughter has to interfere, like a young 8-year-old girl, you know, just give him, you know, please don't hurt him.
And she is the one to hand him the drugs that he needs, this 8-year-old girl.
Yeah, brings the heroin over to her father. And, you know, but then you sort of discover through what he's saying and what Kodrat tells him is Saeed's lot in life right now is to just become this pusher for the drug dealer, to go and find other young, impressionable high school students and get them hooked on heroin so that the drug dealer will have more clients. And he doesn't want to do that, but it's like the only thing he can do right now to get more drugs. So he's trapped in this cycle of harming other people for his own benefit, despite the fact that he was someone who used to stand up and protect young people.
Yeah.
And so he's seeing that.
And he's specifically exploiting his connection with his father to do it, because his father's the principal at that high school. It's the same high school that Sayed and Kodrat went to, right? So I think the fact that that was the same school that Godat is telling all these stories about how Sayed would fight these bullies and fight these oppressors and all this stuff. Now he's the one in there pushing all this stuff on kids and getting kids hooked. And he specifically talks about how hundreds of kids ended up dying by the hands of that very drug dealer.
Yeah.
Right? So he's contributed to the death of hundreds of students.
There's a really great line when he's describing that his job was to go find, I think it's Fatih that's saying to Qudrat what Saeed does. And she's describing his job is to go get more kids hooked. And she says, he was like the wind and the kids were like leaves in autumn.
Oh, that's really
Powerful.
sad.
It's very sad.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about the context around the film?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's talk a little bit, behind the scenes.
Sure, yeah. So I did a little bit of a write-up for this one. Typically we won't, but in this case, it was a hot time in Iran. So prior to the film coming out, there was something called the White Revolution, which was a series of government changes within Iran that attempted to modernize the country. Now, it led to a mass migration of laborers into the city, and this influx led to higher densities of population and a diminishing middle class and a frustration between different economic groups. The combination of these economic frustrations, competing political ideologies that had been going on for the last 20 years, and the secularization of government, which was perceived as the suppression of religious leaders at the time, provided a hotbed for revolutionary movements. It's in this setting that this film was created and released. So just talking a little bit about the film itself, the director's cut of the film was only played to audiences once, and that was at what I call the original TIFF, which is the Tehran International Film Festival. That was in November 1974. That predates the Toronto International Film Festival. That's why I call it the original TIFF.
I had it written in my notes as the other TIFF.
That's
so
so
it's really
funny.
that we both, because it is.
And it was then forced to undergo reshoots and dubbed dialogue changes because the government wasn't happy with the film itself.
Well, and Savak, secret police stormed the screening of the first screening of it at the TIFF, and I guess arrested him right on location.
Oh, I didn't know about that. That's wild.
Yeah, I think they brought him in and had him discuss what he had just seen, what they had just showed, and that's when they had kind of they gave him the breakdown of the dialogue changes he'd have to make and changing the identity of Qudrat and essentially giving the censored version that we now have.
Yeah, and so Qudrat's character was originally meant to be a socialist slash communist guerrilla who was wanted by the Iranian government for his involvement in demonstrations. And one of those demonstrations was where Qudrat receives the bullet wound that we see at the start of the film. Right. But then as a result of the censorship, his character was changed to being a bank robber. Yeah. And then with the theatrical release of the film, the general audiences in Iran were actually aware that the film had been censored and that Qudrat was meant to be a communist. And this kind of built a mystery and intrigue surrounding the original cut. And it kind of became a bit of an urban legend with audiences theorizing about the missing details. And the best quality version of the film, which is the one that we watched, is actually still missing some of the original scenes from before the censorship. But it does have the original ending restored, which we had a chance to watch both versions of the ending.
Yeah, which we'll discuss in a little bit. But just on the topic of the censored version throughout the film, there was also, I think, aside from changing him from anti-government insurgent to bank robber, it seems like they also dialed back a lot of the description of Saeed's drug addiction.
Yeah.
The version, especially when they go into the great detail of what he's gone through and how he fell into despair. It's really highlighting, I think what Kimiai is doing is bringing a lot of attention to these people that were better positions and through the years have fallen on hard times. And he's sort of saying like this might be the Shah's fault. Well, I mean, he's not saying it might be. He's saying under the last couple of years, under the Shah, good people have fallen on hard times and turned to drugs. And I think a lot of the description of how he turned into drugs has been cut out, including a description of how he there's a mention of smuggling the drugs through his anus, which was cut out.
Oh, yeah,
But
yeah.
it's in the version we have that we saw. He says that he put the drugs up there.
Yeah. Also, I think this movie is important for Iranians to see now, especially in the diaspora, because there is a, I guess, nostalgic way of looking at Iran during the time of the Shah as if everything was hunky-dory. But the reality is that obviously something had to have been amiss for frustrations to have built up. That obviously doesn't justify the current state of Iran. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is to look back on everything prior to the revolution and say, oh, everything was perfect is, I think, doing a disservice to what was actually happening. So watching this movie, I think, is really important for Iranians today, especially those in the diaspora, because a lot of people in the diaspora come from families that had the opportunity to escape, right? But people from families that did not have the opportunity to escape are a lot of the same people who suffered the hardest under the Shah and continue to suffer under the current government.
Right. And as you're saying, sort of like from my readings and understanding, it's like that white revolution, it created a layered society in the fact that the people that were migrating to these cities, they were mostly uneducated, unskilled, and they were sort of like, it was forcing overcrowded. Like it was an influx of population, overcrowded homes, hostile situations, and many of them therefore fell into drug addiction. Yeah. And all of a sudden the middle class becomes a lot smaller and the wealth is not being dispersed properly. Yeah. You know, the people are getting meaningful social and economic status upgrades. You're increasing the one percenters of Iranian civilization at the time. And there's people are either falling to despair. There's no middle class really at that point.
And there's an argument to be made that a lot of this was the growing pains of moving from a more feudalistic rural Iran to a more modernized rural Iran, right? And that eventually things could have balanced themselves out a little bit. But it's obviously when you're in the thick of it, it's like things are a lot darker, right? And we will never know because there was never an opportunity for things to level out. Maybe they wouldn't have. Maybe they would have. I don't know, and I don't think anybody really knows. But basically what was happening, to give a little more context, is that in rural areas of Iran, the way that it worked is you would have individuals who owned a ton of land, and then people worked that land. And that was very feudalistic, and that had been the case for hundreds of years, right? Right. And so with the White Revolution, the idea was that people who own that land, first of all, a lot of that land became nationalized, so it became crown land. It became part of the government's resources. Mm-hmm. Another thing that would happen is a lot of I assume they're kind of like middlemen or like middle management, right? People who kind of worked between the landowners and the workers ended up also receiving a percentage of land from the original landowners. So what ended up happening was you had the most powerful people in the rural areas' power being diminished, right? Mm-hmm. And then you had, but still maintaining that higher level, just
status.
Yeah, that higher status. It was just reduced a little bit. And then the middle management people were elevated, but then the people at the bottom at this point were now pretty much guaranteed that they would never be able to get out of the bottom, which is why they left the city. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit more context.
Well, and that all existing within the backdrop of this film and showing that, the Iranian people are falling on dire times clearly ruffled a lot of feathers.
Yeah.
Not only the Shah, but just the depiction of a drug addict in such a horrible state. Obviously it just seemed it was a shocking and gritty film to be shown at that time. It led to the Cinema Rex fire, essentially, which
Yeah.
we take our name for the podcast. I mean, my first thought of calling it Cinema Rex was to revitalize theater in Iran and give it new meaning. But if you're willing to share with us some of the details of the Cinema Rex fire, take it away.
So I obviously wrote this down to avoid saying anything wrong, but basically on August 19th of 1978 in Abadan, Iran, 4 men barred the doors of the Cinema Rex during a screening of this very film, The Deer. They doused the cinema with gasoline and started a fire outside of the 3 entrances to the main hall. It is estimated that about 370 to 470 people died in the fire, with 223 additional people suffering non-fatal injuries, and the remaining 100 people in the audience were able to escape uninjured through the roof. The fire was followed within hours by a firebombing in Shiraz, and 2 days prior, there was a theater in Mashhad that had been burned down, which killed 3 people. At the time of the Cinema Rex fire, revolutionaries blamed Savak for the incident, while the government blamed revolutionaries. While questioning the possibility of this being a false flag operation by the revolutionaries was deemed unpatriotic and considered taboo at the time, following the revolution, multiple documents have been revealed allegedly tying Shia clerics to the attack.
Yeah, it sort of falls on the line of, if you look closely at the documents and who was involved in the judge on the Cinema Rex case, and his father-in-law being potentially one of the perpetrators of the attack, it seems like it really does highlight quite evidently that it was a false flag attack, sort of creating a situation where a film that is provoking the Shah and its government, of course, comes under fire. There's victims of it, and now you can point to see what the Shah is doing to us, and essentially rattling up the people of Iran and saying, your government is out to get you. We should revolt. And it essentially laid the seeds for what became the 1979 revolution in Iran.
I have a friend who's a prominent actor from Iran, and I don't want to necessarily say who it is just in case they don't want this information out there, but they were actually involved in the protests at the time of the Shah. And they were telling me that they remember that on that night when they had found out that the fire had happened, they were meeting with a group of other revolutionaries past curfew, and they were meeting in secret. And they would do this constantly and talk about their plans to, go to new demonstrations and whatever. And they were like, this doesn't really make sense that the Shah would do this, because all this does is it mobilizes individuals outside of our group, and it makes the average Iranian more likely to support our movement. It shakes them out of apathy. It makes more sense for this to have been a false flag operation to get more people riled up. The other reason that they brought this up was they were like, also, this movie, if anything, helps our cause, while a lot of the extremist religious groups are actually anti-cinema and anti-modern art.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense. And as a result of that, this person became ostracized for voicing this to their compatriots throughout these demonstrations.
I know you don't want to mention the name, but I'll just say it. It's Ryan Gosling. Was your friend who was there. You can say it. It's okay.
It was Ryan Gosling. But that ended up being the reaction to that event from this person's peers, from this person's friends, where they were all like, oh, you're secretly a part of Savak, you're actually a government agent, all this stuff, yada, yada, yada. This person was like, oh, our country is not headed in the right direction. And they immediately made plans and left the country prior to the revolution. And then when they saw that the revolution had happened, they were convinced to come back by some of their friends that were like, oh no, things have like leveled out. They went back to Iran and realized, oh no, this is not my country anymore. I can't be here. And then they left and never went back.
Yeah, it's a heavy thing for this film to be associated with. And unfortunately, it will always be this dark shadow that kind of looms over it. But I think this film deserves to have attention for other reasons too. Not only because it's a powerful, beautiful, and gritty film, but it's sort of not. It wasn't. It wanted you to think other things. You know, it kind of wanted to paint a portrait of people who had lesser seen people in Iranian civilization at that
Yeah.
time, and I think it got so caught up in other controversies that I wonder if Kimiai looks back and thinks that the inherent message of the film was lost due to headline news.
What he does say is that, and this is a quote from him, "The Deer was never an apathetic film, and it still isn't."
Mm-hmm.
Which,
that's good.
Yeah, which I think is, very powerful.
With that, do you want to go to trivia time?
Yeah, let's do it. Hit me with what you got.
Okay. In production, the movie was called Tir Baran, but Kimiai later changed it to The Deer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you and I had different thoughts on Tir Baran. I remember asking my mom specifically.
Your initial translation's correct.
Okay, so it's a firing squad. I say it literally translates to like rain of bullets, but I feel like it's a type of it's a firing squad on a prisoner essentially, right?
Well, I think it is actually what you said, that like rain of bullets or a hail of bullets.
Right.
But yeah, I think the idea is that it's supposed to be about
execution.
Yeah, execution, or someone getting riddled with bullets, a hail of bullets.
Yeah.
Why do you think he changed the name?
Yeah, it's a massive pivot. Like, I don't know why it's called The Deer. There's no deer in the film.
No. I think changing the name either was to avoid spoilers or because the ending changed. It doesn't make sense. And like that title doesn't even apply anymore. And then The Deer, I was having a conversation with a friend about this, is likely because, deer are gentle and majestic creatures, which are unfortunately hunted.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be.
So Saeed is the deer?
I think so. But it's also plural. So maybe Saeed is also like a stand-in for the people in the community, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I like that. I'll take it.
Yeah. Should we mention the two different endings?
Yeah, that's a good point. So from the version that we ended up seeing, well, first we watched the YouTube version, which was such poor quality that we ended up having to stop halfway through.
Yeah,
because the sound quality was almost indecipherable, and the film itself was so blown out that you couldn't really see much of what was going on. It wasn't great quality. Then you were able to track down a much better version, and it had included all the initially edited out censored bits, but it also had the two endings. And you and I I remember being worried because we weren't sure at first which one was the real original ending and which one was the government sanctioned ending. And I remember being very worried that the one I preferred was the government sanctioned ending, because I would have been pretty destroyed to find out that the government made a better ending. Yeah. But for a while I was, okay, so let's talk about it. You talk about the two different endings, and then I'll tell you which one I thought was the original.
So just for context, throughout the film, we're seeing that these two friends are very close friends. And right before the ending, Khodrat is like, take this money with Fatih and go take it to this address for me. And he's like, okay, sounds good. We'll do this, yada, yada, yada. Then it cuts to the next morning when Fatih and Sayed are on their way back to the complex, and the complex is surrounded by police.
Yeah.
Sayed convinces the police to let him in to try to negotiate with Khodrat, who's being held up in the room with the police surrounding with police station on the rooftop surrounding the area.
Yeah.
So this is where the film splits into two versions. So in one version, you have Sayed who comes in and he's like, hey, come down, like, give up. I don't want to see you killed, blah, 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 blah. And Khodrat is like, get out of here. I don't want you to be involved in this. Why are you here? Please leave. Blah, 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 blah. And then he was like, no, you're my friend. And then the police are like, don't move any closer. And Sayed makes a run for the door. He gets shot by the police on his way into the apartment. He gets into the apartment. He has a heart-to-heart with Qudrat. And then eventually the police open fire on the room. And I guess a bullet hits something that causes the place to explode. Then
it also has that version has the beautiful line by Saeed that says, I get to die. This is my home. I get to die here with you as my friend rather than in the gutter. Essentially translating to like, I don't die. I won't die a heroin addict dead in the gutter somewhere, which I thought was a pretty beautiful line.
Yeah. And then the other version of the ending is
yuck.
When Sayed comes into the courtyard, Qudrat is like, of course, I should have known you were the one to rat me out to the police. And then he's like,
for no reason.
Yeah, and he's like, what are you talking about? Yeah, and Sayed is just as confused. He's like, what are you talking about? Why would I do that? He's like, yeah, how else would they have known I was here? Blah, 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 blah. And he's like, well, obviously that one other neighbor you helped ratted you out. Blah, 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 blah.
Exactly.
And then Qudrat shoots Sayed. And then Sayed falls over. Qudrat feels bad. He comes into the courtyard, surrenders himself to the police. And then then the police are like, don't take him just yet. Let him have a moment with his friend. Yeah. And then Sayed is like, oh, don't worry. I don't think the bullet hit me in anywhere that's going to kill me. It's a lot like your wound. I should be okay. Blah, 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 blah. And then they take Qudrat away. So that's the other ending.
So you effectively have one ending that has this beautiful, tragic ending of the two friends in solidarity against the police force who die together but remain friends. And then this other one where the guy essentially thinks his best friend betrayed him, shoots him, and then surrenders to the police, and the police don't kill anybody. And I remember thinking initially, well, obviously Kimiai's version must be the one where they both die at the end.
Yeah.
Because it makes the most narrative sense. It doesn't make sense for him to believe Saeed betrayed him. There's no context for that. But you were worried that it was the other way around at first, right?
Yeah.
Were you thinking that the other way was the original?
I was worried momentarily, and it's partially because the version that we watched has both endings back to back with a text on the screen that says, oh,
one of these.
Yeah,
one of these is not real.
Yeah, and the way it's worded is like not very clear which is the real one and which is not. In fact, the way it's worded made me think that it was the other way around. Yeah. And added to the fact that the terrible quality version on YouTube is the one with Kimiai's original ending. And
right, okay.
Yeah,
I didn't even check.
Yeah, and also when I asked my sister, hey, what's the ending that you remember seeing as a kid on TV and on VHS, she was like, oh, it's the one where the two of them are together in the room and they get shot up by the police. Oh, so I was like, because all this text around the version that we watched is like, oh, we like went through such lengths to restore the film, blah, 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 made me think that prior to this version, that ending had never been seen. But given what we know now, I understand it to mean that the version that we have is a more modern restoration. So the impressive thing here is that it's the best quality version. And I think that there might be a couple other moments throughout the film that they were able to restore that maybe wasn't in the VHS version. But essentially the version that my sister saw, the version that's on YouTube, that was a version that was released outside of Iran after the revolution. That also restored the original ending, but I think was missing a couple other restored pieces.
Right. Okay. So all is right with the world because the better version is the Kimiai intended version.
Yeah.
And I remember being like pretty stressed out after you and I were texting back and forth because I was like, God, what kind of person am I if I watch both these versions? Like, yep, the government sanctioned version is the better version of the film.
Yeah.
Fuck artistic creativity and what the director wants. I was so worried that would be the case. But I was like, it can't be. There's no way the government's like, well, I guess I saw a world where they were like, and the government must kill the drug addict and his friend.
Yeah.
But I was like, it makes so much more sense the government's going to come out being like, nonviolent,
Yeah.
and the friends turning on each other. It's like, see, it's people against people. It's not government against people.
Also,
So
the
that's why in
government
yeah.
being sympathetic and being like, let them have a moment together. or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. And it's really bad. Like, it's just so cheesy. And weirdly enough, too, I think that's the version that it cuts to a few people, bystanders in the back, like the neighborhood people watching,
Yeah.
saying what's going on and stuff. So I was worried that might be the original version, because I was like, if they were going to do quick reshoots, they probably can't get the extras involved.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like, there's
Yeah.
more shots of the extras in the government sanctioned version,
Yeah.
which I was worried about.
Yeah, which I will say that I think the one thing missing from the theatrical version is either not necessarily reactions of the other people. I don't necessarily need that, but I would love to see is what started the fire, the explosion, because
Yeah.
it goes from Rodrat shoots one of the officers, and then all of a sudden all the officers open fire.
Mhm.
And then it cuts to an exterior shot of the building,
Yeah.
and it gets riddled in bullets, and then
And then it
some
explodes.
smoke comes out, and then it like completely goes up in flames. But
Yeah.
what I would have loved to see was like, I don't know, a bullet hitting like a glass of oil or something, or a
Yeah.
lamp.
Uncharted 4 mechanics, essentially.
Yeah, I wanted to
Yeah.
see it like hit something.
Yeah.
And it's possible that it was in the original ending and like that was not able to be restored. There's a few things here and there throughout the film that are missing, but I'll talk about it more when we get to nitpicks.
Yeah,
Did you
sure.
have any more trivia?
Yeah. Unlike most Iranian movies that end with the title card Payan,
Mm-hmm.
literally means the end, the deer finished with the title card Tamam, that can translate to done.
With the exception of the theatrical version of the film. Or sorry, the director's cut.
The director's cut.
The
right.
director's cut still says Payan.
So why do you think the added done to?
I don't know. I was thinking about it and I was like, maybe it's like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge to the audience that like
Yeah.
there's something up with this ending.
Yeah, that's I like that idea. I feel like there's got to be something to that. According to one IMDb comment, so take this detail with with a grain of salt, because I don't know how accurate it is, but according to one IMDb comment, this was the 7th and final time Kimiai and actor Vossoughi worked together, as the two parted ways after a very bitter fight. Vossoughi moved to California while Kimiai stayed to make films in Iran. They never worked together. I'm guessing if you cross-reference their IMDb's, you'll see that they never did work together again. But I wonder, I mean, you got to question the validity, but it's interesting to think that these two had a pretty strong falling out after.
Yeah.
Before going on set to shoot this movie, Vossoughi spent about 3 months in an institution for drug addicts outside of Tehran.
Oh, I didn't know that.
According to IMDb, that's it. So, I mean, that's cool. Kind of more method with it. And
Yeah.
I think Dustin Hoffman had done the same thing for Rain Man. Not drug addicts. He spent some time in a mental.
It'd be really weird if he spent all this time with drug addicts, then he came back and they're like, why are you playing this role like this?
A 2009 Film Magazine poll of nearly 100 Iranian film critics named The Deer the best Iranian film ever made.
I can see it.
I can see it. I don't know if I agree.
I haven't seen enough Iranian movies to say that this is the best, but it might be the best that I've seen.
And that's it for trivia.
I have one more.
Oh, great. Yeah, good.
As with most Iranian cinema from this time period, all of the dialogue in the film was dubbed after filming.
That makes sense.
That actually also makes it easier to redub lines with the censored version.
Yeah. Why was that the common approach? Just for simplicity's sake?
I think so. And I think lack of modern technology.
Yeah. Okay. So they're like, we'll just, you still act, you'll say the lines, but don't worry about the quality of sound required.
Yeah.
We'll just get it later.
Which I think
ADR
is
the entire film.
Yeah. And I think that is also a testament to a lot of the scripts and the dialogue, because you can't really veer off too much, because you need the lip sync to match up, right?
Yeah.
So if it's not matching up, then obviously you have a problem. Which there is one scene in here where the dubbed words are like way off. Actually, there's a couple, but excluding the stuff that's like, okay, this is redubbed for the sake of censorship.
Mm-hmm.
The other one that I noticed was when all those rich people are giving meat to people from the windows. And she's like, okay, one at a time,
Right.
whatever. That
Yeah,
is
yeah.
completely different from the lip flap. But I think
Interesting. I didn't notice that.
I think that was completely like ad-libbed.
Okay, critical reactions. I wasn't able to find any critical reviews from esteemed critics, but you said you were able to find one.
The only one I found was what you said about the 2009 Film magazine.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that counts. Yeah. Deeper analysis and our interpretation. Themes and subtext of the films. So I don't think the film is necessarily saying much more subtext than what's on the surface level. I think this is a story about how it's just a meaningful snapshot of a life of a group of people who have fallen on hard times and how their friendship is going to be the one thing that sort of saves them. Or maybe in this case ends in tragedy, but still the friendship was strong. I think the stuff we talked about, the White Revolution, it's a critique on that. It's a critique on the Shah and the way he governed the people of Iran at the time. And it's more of in my opinion, a snapshot of a life of like, look at these people who were once strong individuals, self-respecting, self-sustaining, and now they've shriveled up into these sort of like hapless, addicted sort of stupors.
Yeah, that's what I think too. I think that it was the subtext is about the commentary on society at the time, on the government, on socioeconomic issues between different classes. So I think you're on point with that. And then in terms of themes, I think a big part of it also is about, how to take control of your life and how to stand up for yourself and stand up for what's right. And I think the fact that Kimiai says that it's not an apathetic film speaks to that specifically, that this movie is about shaking people out of apathy. And I think that is the common through line in this film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and the thing you said about the deer being the title, I like that in terms of what subtext could mean. It's just that these people are delicate, soft, harmless creatures that are being destroyed by hunters.
Yeah.
I mean, that fits very nicely in my opinion. So I like that.
Mm.
Okay, best scene. I'll let you go first. What's your favorite scene?
I have a tie for best scene.
I do too.
Okay. So one of them is the courtyard conversation between Sayed and Qudrat, where Qudrat is held up in the room and Sayed's in the courtyard. Mm-hmm. And he's like, get out of here. Why are you here? You shouldn't be here. I don't want you to get involved in this. And he's like,
right.
I'm your friend. I'm with you to the end. Blah, blah, blah. Like that whole exchange with one upstairs and one downstairs. I thought that was beautiful. And the other one for me is the scene where Sayed is like, mitunam, which is like, I can do it. I can do it. And he's like punching at the wall. And it like, that is the moment where he is shaken out of his apathy. It's the moment where you're like, he's back.
Yeah. I was going to say that's for me. That's one of my favorite scenes. Like I just called it the scene where Qudrat tells him to rise up, and that whole speech that comes with it about being, a man of conviction and standing up for who you are. I like that scene a lot. I really like the scene. It's a sad and heartbreaking scene, but that whole first interaction between Saeed and the drug dealer and him begging for another hit. And he's like, I don't have the money, but please, like, just give me one more. I felt like that scene was so heartbreaking, but like how the drug dealer will not relent. He's not giving me an inch. I could feel like the frustration on both sides. And it just felt powerful. It felt like I felt like it was one of the grittier scenes of the film. Seeing this poor disheveled drug addict beg for more heroin. There's just something you don't see too much from Iranian cinema of the time.
That's actually my least favorite scene. I'm joking.
Oh,
no, I'm joking.
Oh, really? I also, again, like when we first meet Saeed, I just have simple stuff like when we first meet Saeed being a disc jockey or whatever announcer.
Yeah.
I like that. So I like seeing him for the first time. I really like a lot of scenes with Saeed. Like when he first has his friend come over that night and introduce him to Fatih. He's like making a little picnic table in the living room. He's like, "We have some delicious things to eat. Look at all the good things we have to eat. Some bread." Like I just like that he's just so excited to have a friend over. I really like all the Saeed scenes.
That too, I wrote this down because it was something that I liked a lot when he's like right before Godrat. Oh, it's right before Sayed and Fatih go inside and she meets him. He's like prepping her for what kind of guy he is and his relationship with her. And he's like, whenever he had a big loss, I shared in that loss with him. Whenever he had a big win, I would leave him alone and I would let him enjoy the win. Like I wouldn't try to take from him. And she's like, "Why are you telling me all this?" And he's like, "Nothing, just don't embarrass me in front of him." Yeah. And I was like, the irony of this guy who's like this like drug dealer with no money is like begging everybody. Embarrass me. Yeah. He was like, "Don't embarrass me in front of my friend." Which I thought was hilarious because Fatih is like has her stuff together for the most part. Like, so it's funny that he's like, "Don't embarrass me."
Yeah, there's a lot of really cheeky kind of funny moments. Saeed says, like the second that, when that guy Mohammed shows up and he's sick and Qudrat gives him a bed to sleep in, which might be the reason why the cops get called over. When Saeed gets home and sees this sick neighbor of theirs in his bed, he's like, "This is slowly becoming our job." Because it's like the second injured person in their house. He's like, it's just really, he's got like little funny moments there, which are really great.
Yeah.
I will ask you this. Do you know like the meaning of, there's a scene when they go visit the police or they're in a jail cell and they meet that man who's got the pigeons with his son. Yeah. And the guy the cop or something wants to like get rid of the pigeons and then the son releases them. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Yeah.
What is we haven't talked about that scene. I feel like it's oddly placed. Not that it's in a bad place, but it's just almost like,
I think he was just breaking some kind of like bylaw of having like a pigeon coop that's like unregistered or like outside of the law or whatever. And they're keeping the pigeons there as like evidence, right? Yeah. And then this kid goes and he releases them. And I think that is meant to be like a beautiful moment that everyone in this jail can kind of empathize with, that they're like, wow, they're being let go, they're free, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, because then I think at the very end of the original intended ending, doesn't the pigeon land again? It kind of ends on the pigeon arriving after the shootout, I think.
Oh, I missed that.
There's a shot of one of the pigeons coming back. Or a pigeon, I mean, I don't know. But
wow.
In this moment, Kimiai is showing this like, and then throughout all this, there is some sense of freedom, or maybe he's talking about freedom in some way. He does have that pigeon land. And I just thought,
that's cool.
It's an interesting choice to call back to this.
That's cool. I do think that within the context, or I think that within the scene where the pigeons are let go, that's the moment that the landlord is shaken out of apathy. Because prior to that, he's like, "I don't care about your guys' issues, pay my rent, blah, 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 blah." But then he's finally like, "Okay, fine."
Oh, that's a good point. I never even thought about how it would affect the landlord. I was just so focused on the guy who cared about the pigeons. But you're right. Maybe there's something really powerful about that. Cool. Okay, least favorite scene.
Why don't you go first? I went first on the other one.
All right. Government mandated ending is one. It was
that doesn't count.
Why? It's still a scene in the. Okay, you're right. But I just have to say, I cannot say enough how much I hated that government and mandated ending. Aside from that, I would say I'll have to think. What is yours? Because mine is that was the least.
That's funny.
It was the government mandated scene. Yeah. What's yours?
Mine is the final scene where the government opens fire and then the place explodes, only because I feel like there's something missing. And it just feels kind of like it took me out of it for a moment, because I was like, wait, they shot up the wall and then it blew up? Like what? Like I wanted to see something there, right? Mm-hmm. But that's fine. To clarify, I don't have any issues with the fact that the place went up in flames or that they were killed. My issue is with the presentation of it. And I feel like it just felt a little clunky.
For sure, yeah. Let's go to a section called Damn, That's Poetry, where we highlight our favorite quotes from the film. I had a few, but let me just start. Well, I'll start with the real standout for me was surprisingly from Fatih. And it's the moment Fatih's kind of chastising the two men. And I'll just say it here from the subtitles I took. It said, I work day and nights, even weekends. What do I get in return? Just misery. Working myself to death in smoke and sweat and abuse, hoping things will change. One night I'm Cleopatra, the next I'm Juliet. One night I'm a housemaid, then another I'm the Pharaoh's wife. And at the end of the day, they pay me just $15. Then I come back to this house, to this shit of sheep and hens and kids. No love in my life, no man, no work, no encouragement, not one bit. He doesn't even have the gall to kiss me.
یه شب کلئوپاترا میشم، یه شب جولیت، یه شب کلفت میشم، یه شب زن فرعون. آخر شب 15 تومن میذارن تو مشتم. بعدشم بیا تو کثافت گوسفند و مرغ و کثافت بچه جون بکن. نه عشقی، نه مردی، نه کاری، نه تشویقی، نه حتی تلویزیونی. نه یه ماچ کردنم که نداره آقا.
I love that entire speech. She's got like a great monologue, and she packs her bags and leaves. I loved it.
Yeah, that's good. And there's a rhythm to it too, in the way that she says it in Persian. There's a rhythm to it that I think works really well. Mine is, and I did my own translation because I found that the subtitles didn't do it justice. I always wanted my life to find an honorable end. Now this makes things right. I'm with you. Dying by a bullet is better than dying in the gutter under a bridge. I wouldn't sell out such a good friend so cheaply. با وفا.
خیلی دلم میخواست یه جوری درست کلکم کنده شم. حالا اینجوری درسته. ما هستیم. با گوله مردن که از تو کوچه زیر پر مردن بهتره. این پای خوبو که من مفت نمیدم.
And با وفا means someone who has a lot of love and loyalty, whether to you or someone that you have a lot of love and loyalty for. It can kind of work both ways. But I guess the closest thing that I could find would be like beloved, but it's not a romantic love. It's like a very sincere love, like a platonic love. And that's said from Sayed Ghodrat at the end when he's justifying why he's come into the room to get basically shot up with it.
Can I give an honorable mention? For lines. It's the scene where Said is getting the speech from Ghodrat, and Ghodrat's kind of giving him the rousing speech that will kind of pick him up off his feet. He says, "Take a look at yourself. Take a look around you. You were the best of us. You were somebody. Tell me who did this to you. Be honest with yourself. Don't you want to shed his blood for this? You go begging to the person who brought misery to your life, begging him to give you even more misery. Where is that old, sharp knife of yours? You help him to destroy the young people we'll be needing tomorrow. If my eyes are closed, my ears are open." And I just think that's a powerful moment because that's the moment he's able to kind of squash his demons and rise up again. And as you were describing, he starts punching the wall, saying, "I can do it."
I like it. Here's my honorable mention.
Yeah, go for it.
Even weird people sometimes. And it's said by Sayed, and I love it because it's like, just because I'm a drug dealer or just because I'm a junkie doesn't mean I'm not a person, which I like.
Yeah, it's very nice. Okay, let's go favorite performance.
Great.
For me, it's hands down. It's not even a contest. It's Behruz Vasuqi.
Yeah, me too.
Vasuqi.
I mean, it's a little bit of a contest. Like, I mean, like everybody in this film, I think, does a great job. But yeah, he does.
He's a standout.
Yeah, he is a standout.
The way he just portrays, it's like you described the Christian Bale doing the machinist thing. He contorts his body to become this like shriveled up,
yeah,
weak despite still being in great shape because he's an actor, he still like disappears into the role, and the like even like his teeth and nails are disgusting.
Yeah. And I like that as the film goes on, you can see him become more and more sober.
Yeah.
Like because the first time you see him, his eyes are like barely open and he's like slumped over the record player, and he like can barely speak. He doesn't know what's going on around him. And as the movie goes on, he sobers up more and more and more. And then by the end of it, he's like spry and strong. And you're like, yo, I don't want to mess with that guy.
Yeah, it's transformative.
Yeah.
Also, there was a mention you were saying how he's really kind of leaning into this affect of like a heroin addict. Like I've seen him in other movies. He doesn't speak that way at all. So even his voice is contorted to this like helpless kind of addict kind of tenor.
Yeah.
Okay, nitpicks and hot takes. What are some of your nitpicks and hot takes of the film?
For me, I feel like there's just pieces missing from the film, and to be completely honest, it's totally possible that these were beats that were removed and they were never able to find them. Some of the things that they did find were found via the Iranian Film Archive, but yeah, just like, for example, when Ghodrat is like, take this money to this address, and then Sayed's like, okay, I'll take Fatih with me because if it's like a couple going, we're less likely to get suspicious looks, whatever. And then it just cuts to them coming back to the complex, and there's like police all over the place. It like that felt like a bit of a jump to me because the way it was cut, it made it look for a second like, okay, now we're gonna see Fatih and Sayed go to that address or whatever. But it's actually them coming back from it. And there's a few other times where it feels like there's weird jumps or like something's missing. And that's my only real nitpick.
Yeah, that's fair. I have two. There's sort of, I mean, despite the fact of what I said about the speech being one of my runners up for the quotes, is it all it takes to get over heroin? Just a rousing speech from your friend, and that's it? You've kicked the habit? Because it seemed like a pretty quick solution. Like,
yeah, maybe we should have seen him go through withdrawals and stuff. Like, I don't know, maybe that would have been.
Yeah, it just seemed a very simple solution to what is recognized that is a very serious problem and a difficult habit to kick. But I mean, I'll forgive it because I don't think the film was like, from that point on, you don't want to be focused on now it's a slow recovery of 6 months. More about the friendship.
Oh, actually, another nitpick, sorry, is he has a bullet wound like the whole movie, and he like doesn't
doesn't get worse, doesn't get infected, he doesn't go to the hospital.
But that could be something that's missing because Sayed does mention like, at the very least, I need to go to the pharmacy and like get stuff to treat you. So it's possible that they like stitched him up or like took the bullet out or whatever. We don't know.
Yeah. But neither of them are trained. They're not they don't have a medical background.
I mean, maybe there's a scene where Fatih mentions that like her mom was a nurse and she like learned to do, it's possible.
Maybe there's a scene Fatih goes to medical school and becomes a doctor.
It's all like 1 hour
theater production.
It's all 1 hour side plot that she's also paying for med school.
My other like minor nitpick is what drug dealer still gives more free drugs to the addict who clearly is heavily in debt to him? I guess it's possible, but it's like this guy's failed to pay him on 3 separate occasions. He owes him a lot of money.
Yeah.
And at the end, he refused the money. Obviously, his 8-year-old daughter hands the heroin over. But I'm just like, man, from what I think I've seen from drug dealers in movies, after a certain point, they're not going to negotiate with you with free drugs. They'll just break your legs or kill you.
Well, they probably wouldn't want their dealers to be getting high regardless, right? Isn't that a part of the 10 crack commandments? Don't get high on your own supply.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, what aged poorly?
I have 2 things. So
I just have one, and I'll say it's affiliation with Cinema Rex, not our podcast, but the theater. I just think like outside the context of the stuff that's in the film, I don't think people can think of this movie now without thinking of its affiliation.
I think that's a good thing, though.
It's a good thing, but it's a tragic thing.
It is tragic.
It's very sad.
But again, this whole movie, like that premise is about shaking people out of apathy. And I think the very fact that talking about this movie elicits a conversation about Cinema Rex is very important, especially because you could use this very movie today to talk about the problems in Iran today. Like this movie is still banned in Iran. You would think that because this movie has like revolutionary subtext, right, that the Islamic Republic of Iran, like the current government, would be like, oh, this is our movie. This is the movie about what we stand for. This is about who we are and about how we defeated the oppressive Shah and yada, yada, yada. But it continues to be banned, probably because the subtext now is even more contemporary given the climate in Iran.
Yeah. Now it's banned also because it's like, well, her hair is showing.
Yeah, her hair is showing. But like, even if they were to like roto brush her hair or whatever, like rotoscope her hair out and put a hijab in every scene, I think regardless of that, there's no way they would show this because of all that subtext.
Right. Yeah. No, of course. What are your what aged poorly? Two things.
I have two. So one of them is that, and again, it's like, it's hard to say that this is like an aged poorly thing. It's definitely a product of its time and its place. But the fact that women are constantly, even like the most assertive women are constantly being like, where are the men to come and save us? Like, it's not even like a subtle, it's like directly stated, like, where are the men who should be standing up for us? Yeah. So you could argue that that's aged poorly, but given our culture and the fact that like, no, this is like a part of the cultural decorum that men are supposed to treat women with respect. And if they don't, it's the responsibility of other men to put them in their place. Right? And I think the fact that these women are standing up for themselves is definitely a matter of agency. But I think that some people might not realize that there's a cultural rule there that, yeah, men are supposed to stand up for women, despite the fact that at a glance, people might look at Iran and be like, oh, this is such a like misogynistic society, blah, 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 blah. The reality is that those are what you're seeing in Iran with like the hijab and whatever. That's not cultural. It's definitely a government mandated thing. Our culture, the people of Iran, like our Iranian culture is very much a thing of respect. Like we have this whole thing called taruf, which is these rules of engagement on how to treat people with respect. There's like unwritten rules that every Iranian knows. And part of that is treat each other with respect, especially women. And if you don't, other men are going to beat your ass. So the other thing for me that doesn't age well is the old timey voices and like some of the old timey blocking. Like even just the way that people are like getting stabbed, it's very rigid. It feels like, but this isn't just like an Iranian thing or just a thing with this movie. This is just the way cinema was in like old movies and old plays and whatever. In the US, I would say by the 90s, things were definitely much more, or sorry, by the 70s, things were much more modernized. But if you look at American movies from like the 50s and the 40s and the 30s, you get a lot of that old-timey voice, which people will often joke about and talk about the like the mid-Atlantic voice, which is like an accent that doesn't really exist. It's like sort of American, sort of British. Similarly here, a lot of people have these like fake voices. Like even Sayed's voice, like his druggy voice, it's like a stereotype from like these old-timey movies, right?
Yeah, he's pulling it, he's turning up the knob a bit on the performance.
Yeah, which given the context of that time period, that's just the way you do it. That's just the way you make movies. But now watching it, you're like, oh, that's dated.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean that. Yeah, I don't know if it's specific to this film, but it just definitely is something. Is it more noticeable, you think, or less noticeable in an Iranian film?
What do you mean?
Like the old timey kind of blocking and accents.
I think it's the same. I just think that because Hollywood obviously had more money and access to better technology and better resources,
Yeah.
I would say Hollywood movies were probably like 20 years ahead with some of this stuff.
Mhm.
I think you would have to compare early 1970s Iranian cinema to like 1950s American cinema. Because
Right.
I would especially say in the 1950s was when you would watch a lot of American movies where like some of the actors would have like an old timey voice and some of them would be much more grounded. Similar with
Yeah.
this film, I would say like half the characters give a grounded performance and half the characters are much more grounded. Like Fatih is definitely a grounded performance. That
Yeah.
other woman who's in the courtyard who's like constantly like roasting everybody, grounded performance. But then the landlord character or like
Mhm.
Sayed, even to some extent Qudrat, like these are, I would say, more of like a classical
Yeah.
performance.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Double feature lineup. What movie would you pair this up for a double feature? I have two, and again, like last time, neither of mine are Iranian.
Okay. So I think the obvious Iranian one is Salesman.
No, okay.
Especially because like that talks about similar things, like similar themes.
Mhm.
And it also obviously has like a play setting.
Mhm.
But I think that this movie does it much more poignantly. But my
Mhm.
official answer is actually Motorcycle Diaries.
Oh, interesting. How come?
Because it unabashedly explores this brotherhood of two individuals within a pre-revolutionary context. And I think that it can lead to a lot of very interesting discussions with people after watching the movies. So like if you sit down with a group of people, you watch Motorcycle Diaries and this or whichever order, I think that it can lead to a lot of really interesting conversations.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I haven't seen that in a long time. Since like I think I saw it when it came out,
So good.
and like not since. For my double feature, I have Abel Ferrara's Bad Lieutenant because I remember seeing Bad Lieutenant. Like my dad is he likes cop movies a lot, and he likes like old crime cop whatever. And I remember like showing him Bad Lieutenant, and he was like, "What is this film you showed me?" Like he didn't like it at all because Bad Lieutenant is Harvey Keitel literally like jonesing for, is it heroin or crack? It's either heroin or crack. I think he's a heroin addict. And he's just like, it's just like a downward spiral of a drug addict. And he's a cop, but he's like, he's terribly lost. He can't do his job. He can't function. He's trying to solve a crime, but it's like long sequences of him just like spinning out on junk. Tough watch. Great performance by Keitel. The other one I would say is Midnight Cowboy, because Midnight Cowboy has John Voight and Dustin Hoffman, the friendship between two unlikely, I mean, for Midnight Cowboy, it's unlikely pairings, but the brotherhood and friendship formed between these two guys. And I'm pretty sure Dustin Hoffman's character, that's from the famous, hey, I'm walking here, but I'm pretty sure he's a drug addict in it. And just like that film was so gritty for its time, showing like New York in a new light and showing these two like again, hapless fools that are trying to make a living, trying to make some money and they're relying on each other in their friendship. I think there's a lot of elements that could make interesting double features. But Bad Lieutenant and this film would be my go-to for a double feature.
When I was reading online, a couple other people actually drew a lot of parallels between this film and Thelma and Louise, and also with Butch Cassidy.
Oh,
so
yeah, totally.
I feel
I
like
see that.
there's an argument to be made there. I just think like you don't want to pair something up with something that's too similar, because then your conversation just becomes very surface level. It's like, oh yeah, those are the same movie. But I feel like the examples that you and I gave are examples where you can have a lot of interesting conversations. Like even with Motorcycle Diaries, you can be like, okay, like what happened within the context of Motorcycle Diaries led to Che Guevara becoming a revolutionary. And that
Right, yeah.
incidentally informed a lot of what was going on in Iran in the 70s, which informed this movie. And then this movie came out before that other, right? So it's like kind of this weird cyclical thing.
Yeah. No, I also think even just tonally for Midnight Cowboy, it was, I think it was like nominated for some bunch of Oscars or at least a few, and it was rated X. Like it was considered so gritty and like against the grain of what standard Hollywood filmmaking is at that time that it got an X rating. It might have been the first X-rated movie to get Oscar nomination. It's not a hardcore, it's not triple X, it's not porn, but it's just so gritty and in terms of like unabashedly showing the life of struggling people.
That's wild.
Addicts and whatever, that they were like, yeah, this is like, yeah. So I think still to this day it's got an X rating. But yeah, interesting. Can this be made as a modern Hollywood remake?
What do you think?
I think so. I often give, I'm probably going to constantly be pretty lenient to this. Actually, I think one future film we're doing on the list I've already thought about cannot be. But I think for the most part, there's so many creative voices out there that they're, I think a lot of these themes are pretty universal. The idea of like the strength of friendship and the ability for someone to be able to change and get out of their rut. And I could see like a modern remake, maybe not taking place in Iran, but again, like doing that thing of like, can this version be done with like a bunch of like about two homeless San Franciscans?
So I have a question. When you're talking about this modern remake, are you making the friend character a revolutionary or are you making him a bank robber?
I would probably do revolutionary as a nod to the initial intention.
That's interesting. I think
bank robber would probably make more money though.
Yeah, I think as a Hollywood remake, you would have to lean into the bank robber thing. And I think you would have to change the ending because I think the idea that like the entire police force is surrounding this complex for a bank robber is kind of weird.
Yeah.
But it makes sense given the fact that like, no, he's actually this like wanted revolutionary guerrilla fighter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think what would be very interesting is if Hollywood threw their money and resources, and this is my pitch in case there's like a executive producer listening, threw their money and resources behind an Iranian American or Iranian Canadian director to tell a modern version of this set in Iran, but as an American production, like with the resources of Hollywood. Because you could very easily adapt this exact same film into modern Iran, especially with the current state of things with the Zan Zendegi Azadi movement.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, essentially making him, instead of making an anti-Shah insurgent, he's an anti-Khamenei. Khamenei,
yeah.
Khamenei. Yeah.
Which and I think it also plays up the thing with the women trying to shake the men out of apathy. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah. No, it's an excellent point. Final thoughts and grades. It's really funny because as I mentioned earlier, you and I had gone through two versions of this film, the YouTube version, which I do not recommend people watching because we watched the first hour of that film essentially. And I was like, it wasn't even that I was having such a hard time following, but there's something about the pacing and all the edits cut out. I was not on board. And I was like, this film is going to be a slog. The second you sent in the clear version, I was immediately hooked.
Me too.
I watched it from the beginning and I was like, this film is phenomenally better than I thought it was going to be. And it's such a big difference that I think if people want to see this film, they have to track down through various means. Maybe they can reach out to you and find out how you got it or something, or find it in a theater. I know TIFF Lightbox might occasionally play it, but that YouTube version, which is the only version that people that I asked were able to find online, is almost unwatchable.
Yeah.
And it changed my perception. So I would have given that initial version maybe like a D if I was going to watch that movie.
We also only watched it halfway through.
I know, but there was so much good cut out of the even the first, I enjoyed the first, I rewatched the first 50 minutes again and I was enjoying it so much more. I was really engaged in the characters. I would say this version for me is a B plus. It's really high up there. I still think like just comparing the two films we've done so far, I liked Where's the Friend's House more.
Interesting.
But when you say interesting, I imagine that you disagree for strong.
You would
reasons,
imagine correctly.
yeah, but let's litigate that. I would say that it's very high for me. It's a B plus.
Okay.
I gave the other one A minus, so it's pretty much the same. It's just a great difference. What did you? Yeah,
I agree with your assessment of the YouTube version. It was not good. I could like barely understand what was going on because it was like, especially the audio quality was so bad that I could like barely understand what they're saying. And every like once in a while I had to be like, what did he say? Like, what's going on? Yeah. And then the version that we watched, I actually noticed some things were missing from the original version that were in the YouTube version. Like the guy who does the sound effects on stage, that goes on way longer in the YouTube version.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, but I imagine that the people who did the restoration didn't want to cut to a version that was that bad quality to fill in the missing piece. But for the most part, the version we watched had actually restored more.
But I will say on that note, like there was in the restored version, there's like a scene that was cut out of the YouTube version.
Yeah.
When they first meet up in the hug and they're driving back to Saeed's place for the first time.
Yeah.
Wodrat just looks at him and goes something along the lines like, "What happened to you, man?
Yeah.
You weren't." And it's such a small moment, and I don't know why it's cut from the YouTube version, but it instantly made me know everything I needed to know about these two.
Yeah.
Like he's changed so much and he cares so much about this friend that he hasn't been in touch with. And it's cut out. And I feel like that scene is so small, but it says so much. It gives so much fabric of their relationship and context.
That must have been censored originally. Because what I suspect happened was that the YouTube version, the version that my sister saw as a kid, the VHS version, I suspect that ever since the revolution, people have been iterating on each version that came before, adding more and more pieces as they're being discovered. So I don't think necessarily that the YouTube version cut it out, but I think they just hadn't found it yet to put it back in.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And so I also suspect that the version that we watched didn't put in the rest of the sound effects guy because the next best version is probably that YouTube version. But yeah, my rating for this is overall an A. Not necessarily an A plus, but definitely above an A minus. And for comparison, I gave Where's the Friend's House a B plus. And I think a big part of it for me is that this film does a really good job in portraying Iranian cultural values. And I think the feeling that I get from Iranian culture, that you can have these very real conversations and these very tragic contexts that inform why people act the way that they act, right? And it's like, well, you know, like these are the tragedies that our people have had to go through. But it's also so full of heart and so full of love. And the relationship between the two friends especially is something that I think is missing from a lot of Iranian cinema. Not necessarily like that friendship, but that heart, that level of heart and love throughout the film. It's just something that I think is missing from a lot of Iranian cinema, but it's something that is clearly there in our culture, right? Even to the extent that like you have this guy, Sayed, who's this drug addict, right? And he's fallen on hard times and he's speaking with a lot of like street slang throughout the film. In fact, that slang, that level of slang is called lot.
Yeah.
Right. And he calls his friend Biluti or like Bilati or something. He's like, he's like, instead of calling his friend sophisticated, he's like, you're on slang or something. And even the way that he says the word slang is slang in and of itself. But this guy who is very street and slang is constantly calling people things like Bavafa, which is like my loyal friend, or like my beloved friend, or he's like constantly saying no karatam, cha karatam, which he's like, I'm your servant, like I'm here to serve you, I'm beneath you, like what can I do for you? Like he's constantly elevating people around him, and he's so poetic in the way that he speaks with that love and camaraderie, and that, I think, balance of poetic love with, you know, the gritty reality of things is something that a lot of Iranian films don't have.
Yeah. Ironically, it's a revolutionary film that was filmed during pre-revolutionary times, which led to its own altered revolution, which panned out not in any way in the way the director had hoped.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of parallels from real life to what this film is trying to say and convey. And yeah, it's a fascinating movie because I'm really glad we watched it for this. I hadn't seen it before this, so I highly recommend it, and I think it's one of the classics for sure.
Yeah. So our average score for this, I guess, levels out to what, like an A-?
A-.
Yeah.
And I think, and it's about the same, slightly less than that for the first one.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
the
First one, I guess you would call it like B++. Because I said
exactly.
B+, you said A-.
Yeah,
so I guess
that's right,
B++.
yeah. So right now, this film's winning.
Yeah.
In the 2-movie race. Awesome.
Cool.
Well, thank you very much, Farhan, for mustering through this this cold and the sore throat that you have.
Yeah.
I think you sound great.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry to the audience for the state of my voice and for having to listen to it like this.
I think they'll be able to forgive you. Unless it's because it's 2 episodes in, they're like, forget it. This guy's unprofessional.
Yeah.
I'm skipping over to something else.
I'm out of here. This guy sucks.
But yeah, for Cinema Rex, I'm Kaveh Mohebi.
I'm Farhan Moradi.
Be Omide Didar.
Get a ding 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 ding.
Music for Cinema Rex was written and performed by Sohail Sadinejad.